Well, from bad to worse, there are more unfortunate developments in the streets of downtown Portland, Oregon to discuss. When last we left our story, Antifa and Black Lives Matter activists were creating chaos about what looks to be a justified police shooting, taking over street intersections and getting violent with anyone who didn't perfectly obey their mob rule. You can see the full story in my last video if you missed it. Recall the police force under the leadership of Mayor and Police Commissioner Ted Wheeler did basically nothing as the chaos unfolded. They allowed Portland's streets to be taken over and Portland citizens to be harassed and assaulted. The mayor has since issued statements standing by that police inaction, taking to Twitter to say he was appalled by the footage he saw, but he supports the decisions of the Portland police and that he believes it's difficult to weigh complex legal and safety issues, not just for citizens, but for the police themselves. He elaborated further in the Oregonian, saying the porridge is either too hot or too cold. At any given moment in this city, the police are being criticized for being heavy-handed and intervening too quickly, or they're being criticized for being standoffish and not intervening quickly enough. Well, first off, it's a dishonest deflection for him to say he supports police decision-making. He is the police commissioner. He makes the ultimate decisions for the police force. A little leadership and responsibility would be nice here. Secondly, I understand there's a lot of gray area for police in deciding how and when to intervene in protests preemptively. Preventing crime in constitutionally acceptable ways can be difficult. But this wasn't a case where the police needed to act preemptively. The crime was already ongoing and abundantly observable in multiple separate instances. It's not very difficult to instruct your police officers where you observe lawbreaking. Stop the lawbreaking. That to me seems like an obvious guideline with little or no complexity at all. The mayor says the whole scenario was exaggerated and unfairly reported by conservative media. Quote, people should not immediately jump to the kinds of statements that were being put out on Breitbart and Fox News, that because the police did not intervene in that particular moment under that exact circumstance, that chaos rules the streets of Portland, or that the police didn't do their job, or that I'm a nutcase mayor. Their words, not mine. He also says, I'm willing to take criticism all day long from Fox News, but I'm not willing to accept criticism from Fox News of the men and women of the Portland Police Bureau. Nobody's relying on Fox News or Breitbart's second-hand description to say what happened in the streets of Portland is unacceptable. And even if their sources are Breitbart or Fox, do you know what happens when people click those stories? They go straight to the video and they watch it for themselves, and they can see unfiltered with their own eyes what happened. They can see that it wasn't just one particular moment or one exact circumstance. It was ongoing and continued. I don't need Fox or Breitbart to tell me that scene was total anarchy. I watched that scene for myself. And I certainly don't need Fox or Breitbart to tell me this mayor is a nutcase. I read his words myself. Now, I personally don't buy the mayor's explanation that he's just trying to balance free speech and the right to protest with public safety concerns and police intervention. I think he's enabling this nonsense intentionally because he agrees with the political sentiments of the mob. And I think there's plenty of evidence to support that idea, including his prior encouragement of degenerate mob behavior within his city. But even if I take him at his word, his overprotection of his police force is coming at the underprotection of his citizenry. His effort to make his cops look good is making his entire city look bad. And predictably, plenty of people within the city aren't happy with that standard. On Saturday night, Patriot Prayer, Joey Gibson's conservative libertarian activist group, organized what they called a flash march for law and order in Portland, with a very simple message and purpose, according to Gibson and his attendees.
The mayor really need to vote him out because he really uses his political beliefs to guide how he governs, and that's not the way it should be.
Guys called the police didn't respond because the mayor told them not to. So that's why we're here. We just want the mayor to enforce the law. It doesn't matter what your political ideology is.
The group marched around the downtown streets. Predictably, Antifa showed up, unironically flying their hammer and sickle flag and apparently prepared for a fight. Independent reporter Andy No was on scene and says the march was peaceful until this confrontation, in which an Antifa member approaches and sprays the marching group with mace. At that point, a chaotic street brawl erupts between dozens of members on either side. It lasts for some time and leaves participants bloody. And again, there was very minimal police intervention. One cop can be seen firing pepper balls to try to defuse the situation, but that's about it. The cops say they observed people in possession of hard-knuckled gloves, firearms, knives, and batons, and again, despite the obvious lawlessness, the police made 0 arrests on Saturday night, and there have been 0 charges filed to date, but they say investigation is ongoing. So that makes 2 consecutive weekends of violence and de facto lawlessness in Ted Wheeler's city, and whether the mayor has finally realized that this ongoing chaos is unacceptable, or he's caving to increasing pressure for action, he's issued a statement pledging a self-described crackdown on the violence. He says, quote, "I will not allow continued planned street violence between rival factions to take place in Portland." Violence between rival factions. Even if I grant that the violence between Patriot Prayer and Antifa was mutually instigated by both sides, which I don't believe Saturday night's event would have been violent in any way were it not for Antifa's presence. But even if this case was mutually incited violence from rival factions, who were the rival factions the prior weekend? Antifa versus regular people driving on the street? Antifa versus the elderly? Who were the rival factions over the summer at the Homeland Security ICE office? Antifa versus federal police officers? Antifa versus local charity? It's obviously not a problem of rival factions when one faction is attacking everybody else, including random passersby who aren't even political activists. But what's the mayor's plan? Is it going to be more proactive policing? Is it going to be an increased police presence? Is it going to be a pledge to prosecute lawbreakers aggressively? No, instead he's going to introduce a new ordinance to enact reasonable time, place, and manner regulations for demonstrations held within the city, with the goal of protecting both the freedom of expression for demonstrators and the safety of the entire community. In other words, more law. He's just going to write more law as though the behavior we've been observing isn't already obviously illegal. Obstructing traffic is already against the law in Portland. Assaulting people and damaging property are already against the law in Oregon. The problem is not a gap in the law, Mr. Mayor. The problem is your unwillingness to enforce existing law. The mayor concludes this is not a partisan issue. This is not about ideology. This goes beyond Democrat and Republican. This is about delivering a strong and principled message that we will not tolerate violence in our community. Yeah, that sounds great, but 2 questions. If you don't tolerate violence in your community, why have you tolerated ongoing violence in your community? And if it's nonpartisan, why have you made it partisan? Why have you thanked Occupy ICE protesters for building a degenerate biohazard hobo encampment in your city?
I want to thank you for bringing national attention to this important issue.
Why are you saying that dissatisfaction with your leadership is due to right-wing media presentation instead of what we're all watching with our own eyes? Mr. Mayor, I don't know what else you expect us to conclude besides the idea that your partisanship and your ideological persuasion are driving your inaction on this issue, that your stated political agreement with these lawless aggressors is behind your willingness to look past their aggression. And when you set the standard that simply driving down a Portland street on a Saturday afternoon might get you assaulted or your car vandalized, what option do you leave your citizens but to join one of these rival factions, simply out of self-preservation? This new law, just like the existing laws, is only as good as your willingness to enforce it. The words on the books mean nothing if they don't translate to cuffs on the wrists. And if you aren't willing to do that cuffing over basic level crimes like hitting people or damaging their property, why should we believe you that you're going to do it over more complex issues like protesting at the wrong place or at the wrong time or in the wrong manner? Your new ordinance, Mr. Mayor, is just another example of your broader governance philosophy. Lip service. Words, not actions. If the city of Portland doesn't tolerate violence as a political tactic, or even just generally, show us. Don't tell us. Until you do, you'll see more of these rival factions, not less. Thanks as always for listening and for supporting this channel. Always appreciate that thoughtful discussion down below, and especially over on Twitter, that is at ML Christiansen. You're always welcome to come hang out and chat in my live streams. Those are linked down in the description. Looking forward to it. Okay, bye.